Welcome to the Climbing the Charts podcast. I'm Angie Lawless, and I'm here with my co-host, Brandon Miller. Today, we are honored to have 3 guests on Climbing the Charts. First, we want to welcome Judge Sheila Calloway. Judge Calloway is from Louisville, Kentucky. She moved to Nashville to attend Vanderbilt University, where she got a BA in communications before also earning her JD from Vanderbilt Law School.
Double door.
My alma mater. Yeah. Judge Calloway began her public service career in the Metropolitan Public Defender's Office in Davidson County and was later appointed as a juvenile court magistrate. In November of 2013, she ran for juvenile court judge, was successfully elected in 2014. She's currently in her second 8-year term. Congratulations on the recent.
It's a long term.
It is.
She's committed. Judge Calloway is an adjunct professor at both Vanderbilt University Law School as well as Belmont College of Law. Judge Sheila Calloway is renowned for her unique approach to dispensing justice, blending humor, passion, and judicial wisdom to challenge traditional perspectives within the United States legal system. Her tireless efforts continue to shape the landscape of justice, leaving an indelible mark on her community and beyond. And I think that you'll see in this podcast, she is not your typical judge. Welcome to the show.
Thank
Judge
you.
Calloway.
Excited about being here.
See, next, we're also welcoming Davidson County's Juvenile Court Clerk, Lonnell Matthews. Lonnell is an alum of Tennessee State University, where he studied accounting and business law. In 2007, at age 27, Matthews became the youngest African-American elected to Nashville's Metro Council, representing District 1. He served on the Leadership Council for the Nashville After Zone Alliance, NASA, under Mayor Carl Dean, as well as the director of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhoods and Community Engagement, aka ONCE, under Mayor Megan Barry, where he was also the project lead of the team that created Hub Nashville, which is Nashville's redesigned 311 system, which is very cool. In his current role as the juvenile court clerk, Lonnell works to bring positive reform to the criminal justice system, change the narrative surrounding our youth, and use data-informed strategies to create better outcomes for both they and their families. Lonnell has been a critical force behind the creation of the Nashville Youth Campus for Empowerment, which we'll talk about a little bit later, that will include a new trauma-informed juvenile court, 24-hour youth assessment center for youth in crisis, as well as a family support center. Lonnell and his wife, Jahari Matthews, have 2 children, Ari and Pilar. And just want to give a shout out to Lonnell's wife, Jahari, who was recently named one of the 10 people to watch in 2024 by the Nashville Business Journal. Mm-hmm. As many of our listeners may know, she's the vice president and executive director of the Tennessee Titans Foundation, which I'm excited will be a presenting sponsor for an affordable housing nonprofit I've done a lot of work with, Rebuilding Together Nashville,
yes,
for our inaugural Building Community Breakfast that will be May 4th. So just to kind of give a plug for that as well, if any listeners are interested, they can reach out to us, and tickets are $25. And she's going to be our keynote speaker.
She will be.
So welcome to the show.
No,
Lonnell.
thank you for the introduction, Brandon. I hope you have the Hub Nashville app on your phone.
Yes.
Sounds like you do.
I do.
Sounds like you're enjoying it.
And
So,
I would say you do not want to get in a resume contest with this man because Brandon only talked about maybe a third of the stuff that he's done.
Yeah, Angie had to really edit it down. So
I know. I mean, Leadership Nashville, which is super prestigious, didn't make the cut because he's done so much. So
thank you.
last, we are welcoming Julieanna Huddle. Julieanna is the executive director of Court-Appointed Special Advocates, CASA, having joined the organization in 2013 and promoted to the position of ED in 2016. Also in 2016, Julieanna was recognized by the Center for Nonprofit Management's top 30 in their 30s, given to individuals who've made a lasting impact in the Nashville community. All right, we're going to start the show with Judge Calloway and Lonnell to talk about the juvenile justice system and the most exciting new Nashville for Youth Campus for Empowerment. And then we'll bring on Julieanna to talk a little bit more about the importance of CASA and its mission. So I've been on the board of CASA now for several years, and Lonnell, I've heard, when you came to speak to us, I heard a little bit about the new campus. So I'm really excited to hear more and just sort of talk throughout the show about some of the misconceptions about what goes on, down at the juvenile court, and so super excited. But okay, so I know you guys are both musical people. I hear you love to DJ.
I could play music.
Okay. And the judge has been singing ever since she walked in the door.
Warming up.
Warming up.
So we always ask, what are you guys listening to these days? What kind of music?
Great question.
That's interesting. You start.
I've been listening. So, ironically, one of my deputy clerks just recently released a single this past Friday. She sings gospel, and it's called "It's My Time." And yesterday, I was playing it all day. I added it to my gospel playlist, and all throughout the house, we were doing our Sunday afternoon cleaning and playing her music. A lot of so there's a country artist, Breland, who my son could not stop playing the song "My Truck." And so I actually started, I was like, man, I really like this song. Let me listen to some other songs of his. And I really like his music. He does some really good music.
That's awesome.
So that's a really difficult question for me because I listen to music as often as I can.
Yeah.
And just a variety of things. And literally, whenever I'm going to an event or something, I listen to Gloria Gaynor, "I Will Survive," just in case I'm asked to sing. That is my go-to song. Nice. And what friends know about me as well is pretty much every week, particularly on Tuesday evenings, I'm going to go sing karaoke. Mm-hmm. And so, awesome. I'll listen to the radio all day Tuesday. And if I hear a song, I'm like, ooh, I think I can try that tonight. And that's what I'm listening to.
Well, it's funny because on our lightning round questions at the end, we were going to ask you what your favorite karaoke song was.
Oh, how funny.
And
that's
I know. I mean, I'm interested. Do you ever not smile? I mean, every time I've ever been in your proximity, you are smiling and laughing and... Like, what about the bad days?
I had a difficult court hearing today, and it was one that disappointed me, frustrated me legally, the things that were happening in that case. And I don't think I was smiling. I was speaking in a very stern voice, and I have. My son will tell you that he's seen it a couple of times as well.
How old's your son?
He's 20 now. He'll be 21 soon. But yeah. So he's seen it a couple of times. There are times where I do get a little serious and I may not actually smile, but I still have joy in my spirit and joy in my heart, even as serious as it can be.
Well, it's definitely contagious. And it makes others feel good. So
let's start out by zooming out a little bit. Tell us a little bit about the structure of the juvenile court, kind of the ecosystem, the departments, budget, kind of number of employees, things like funding sources. Is that local, state, federal? What does that look like? Because I think a lot of our listeners, even ones who really follow politics and law, really don't know that much about it.
I'll start.
Including me.
I'll start, and I'll try to give a bird's eye view of what juvenile court stands for and what we do. We really are a family court. We handle a lot of family court cases. We deal with cases that deal with children and what's happening to the children. And so we divide the court into kind of three parts. Our first part is our parentage division. In our parentage division, we do every case of unmarried parents from the beginning. So we do DNA testing at the courthouse. We determine whose paternity, who's the father. We also determine who is the primary residential parent versus the alternate residential parent. We determine how much time each parent should have with their children. We determine how much support a alternate residential parent should pay to the primary residential parent. And if they don't pay, we determine the consequences. And so we do anything in between all of those cases. We handle, and Lonnell can give you the exact numbers of how many of those cases we handle each year, but that's really a big third of the cases that we handle. Okay. Most of those cases, particularly the child support cases, are generated from federal funds, federal 4D funds that if a person receives any type of state benefits, and it's a one party and it's a state benefit on behalf of a child, then the state is going to take action against the other parent. And so if for instance, a mother applies for TANF benefits, then the state is going to say, who's the father of the children? And then they're going to require a court action for child support for that father. We have probably about 80% of those cases are generated from the state. And then there's about 20% that are private party cases where people just aren't having any state benefit, but they need child support or they need custody decisions made. And so that's a big chunk of the cases that we have. Our third of cases that we deal with are cases about parents who are alleged to abuse or neglect their children. The majority of these cases start with the Department of Children's Services. I would say about 85% are generated from the Department of Children's Services. So if a child is suspected of being abused and they're at school and the school recalls in a referral, then the Department of Children's Services will come to the scene, interview the child. That child can be removed from the parent's custody, and we handle the case. We determine whether or not, we don't decide whether the parent is guilty or not guilty. We determine whether the child has been abused. And then if they have, or neglected, if they have been abused or neglected, we determine what should happen to the child, what's in the best interest of the child. Should that child stay with the parent with some type of services? Should the child be removed and taken to family, friends, or should the child go into the Department of Children's Services custody, which is a state agency? Again, that's a big chunk of the cases that we handle. I think what people don't understand when you talk about juvenile court, literally 2/3 of the cases that we deal with are about the parents and about what the parents have or have not done in order to take care of their children. The cases that we do in our neglect and dependent and abuse cases, generally the state has a state budget that run the Department of Children's Services. The cases that we handle, private parties, is coming from our local funded budget money. The last portion of the cases that we have, we divide it into two, are our status offense cases. Those are for youth who are committing a offense that's only an offense because of their age. And so like running away from home or curfew violation or not going to school. Yes. All of those are status offenses. And it's a large majority of the cases that we deal with children.
Yeah.
The smallest number of cases that we deal with is the cases that everybody believes is all about juvenile court, is those youth who have committed crimes.
Right.
And it's a crime no matter the age. And so you're talking about simple assault, shoplifting, disorderly conduct, all the way up to aggravated robberies, murder, and things in between. That's actually the lowest number of cases that we handle in our court system, although the community believes that that's what juvenile court's about and what we do. We are funded by Metro government. I have a staff of approximately 125 people. I have a large budget that I'm in charge of making sure that everybody gets paid, that all the services that we do get taken care of. We also have a pretrial housing facility that we manage. And so that's for youth who we determine are a risk to the community based on the charge that they've done. We hold them in our pretrial housing facility until their case is adjudicated or until their case is finished. And
is that on the same location?
It's on the same location, the same building.
Okay.
And we have a private provider who runs that facility. Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's right there as well. So we pay a private provider to run that facility.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I do think the perception is like, the bad kids go there when the reality is that it's the mostly innocent children who are at the hands of parents or others in their family that you guys are trying to protect rather than trying to, give punishment.
Absolutely. And what I always tell people, when I look at the number, there are cases where, based on the type of charge, usually your very serious murder cases or serious aggravated robbery cases where someone's hurt in the offense, where the state is asking that those children be tried in the adult system. When we did a study a couple of years ago about the youth that ended up into the adult system, what we found out is that over 70% of those youth started in our system based on being abused or neglected or being the victim of a custody fight. And so what we absolutely know is that if we can get parents on the right page of making sure that they're providing for their children, doing everything they can to provide a safe, structured neighborhood, safe, structured home, a loving home, where two parents are caring for them, whether the two parents are living together or not, but where two parents are making sure that they have everything that they have, there's a least likelihood of them ending up in the system. And so that's what we really try to focus our efforts on, making sure that we're providing the services that we can for all of our children, not just the ones that end up on the news stories.
Right.
And, I will say, I always push back when people say, you're working with these when I'm in the store or somewhere and people ask me, what do you do? I'm the juvenile court judge. And they say, oh, you work with those bad kids. Like, no, actually, I don't work with any bad kids.
Right.
I do work with children who have made bad mistakes. Mm-hmm. And it is our job to make sure that we get them to a point where they have treatment and rehabilitation and that they can be successful in our community. And so it's really important to know that many of these children that have committed these serious offenses are truly victims themselves, that they have what we call adverse childhood experiences. Their numbers, if we do assessments on all of our youth, we do risk assessments, we do needs assessments, and when you look at their rating on the scale of 10, 0 to 10 on the adverse childhood risk assessment, the majority of them are at least 8 and above. And so that means that they've had a lot of childhood trauma.
Serious
trauma. A lot of serious trauma over their lives.
Because, those factors are, like, they're major, right? Like, I don't know what they are, but, like, sexual abuse, physical abuse.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
Tell us about, like, what's the just sort of quantifying how much sort of case activity you have over the course of a year? What does that look like? I know there's different types of cases, but like, what are some sort of just you get an idea of sort of what the caseload looks like?
Lonnell, she said you had all those numbers.
So
this is a Lonnell question.
We see. So my office is the keeper of records for court. We process all legal filings. We do all the scheduling for each judge and magistrate. We staff each of their courtrooms with the clerk, and we're the fee office for the court. And in juvenile court here in Davidson County, we see between 8,000 and 10,000 new petitions annually. I think last year we were at about 9,700 new petitions. When you add motions on top of that, on existing petitions, our magistrates see in the range of about 45,000 hearings a year.
And how many magistrates are there?
We have 9 magistrates.
Okay.
8 of them are full-time, and we have 1 part-time magistrate.
Okay. Man.
And then me. So there's 10 judicial officers in the building. Well, 10 judicial officers. 2 of them have court in a separate building because of the size of our building. So we have 2 that are in a separate building. The one that does our Safe Babies Court, as well as our Metro Student Attendance Center, that does everything about school attendance and truancy. They're in a separate building, and then the other 8 of us are in the main building.
Okay. So this will be interesting, kind of in light of what we, were just talking about. But, in this legislative session, I saw where Senator Taylor passed 2 bills. One, the Juvenile Organized Retail Theft Act, which allows youth ages 15 or older to be transferred to criminal court for stealing guns or for organized retail theft, such as smash and grab, burglaries. And the second being the Parental Accountability Act, which requires a fine of $1,000 for a second or subsequent delinquent act paid by the child's parent or guardian unless they can't afford, and then the court has some discretion to turn that into community service hours. In your opinion, are these positive measures? Are we going in the right direction? Or Is it going to solve anything?
Let me breathe before I answer. I think it's unfortunate that there is a belief that juvenile crime is at an all-time high across the state. And there are absolute numbers that show that statewide juvenile crime is actually down. The TBI, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, submitted numbers last year that showed from 2011 to 2021 that statewide juvenile crime was down about 60%. Yeah. Here in Davidson County, when you look at our arrest numbers from 2013 to 2023, juvenile crime it's right on the same line as the statewide data. We're down about 65%. Wow. And so the things that we have been doing over the last couple of years have been working. And there are a lot of things that we've been doing. We've been collaborating more with our schools. We've been collaborating with the police department. We've been doing some restorative justice practices. We've been doing a lot of diverting cases because we absolutely know that when you divert children out of the system and you give them positive things to do in the community, that they don't come back. And so the recidivism numbers of the cases that we divert hovers around 6% of them come back, which is a really good number. Yeah. And so the things that we have been doing that are not punitive, but that are giving support to the family that we work with, because we work with the entire family. You can't just work with the child by themselves. You have to work with the family. But we have been working well with the families that we serve. We've been doing a lot of community partnerships and programs. Lonnell, who is clerk in the day, dad at night, and somehow in between does My Brother's Keeper, does programs with the school system, and he's just amazing on all the things that he does. But supporting programs like My Brother's Keeper, Epic Girl, and Why We Can't Wait, and the list goes on and on. We have about 40 agencies that have all said, hey, we want to work with your youth. We get them to a point where they're evidence-based, that we can use them, and that they're doing the things that they said they're doing. Yeah. And it's working. It's working. And so when you take these tools away from us, and, most of the people and the families that we serve are indigent. Yeah. And tacking $1,000 fee on them is going to hurt more than it's going to help.
And if they're already, if they're working 2 or 3 jobs, even converting that to community service is less time that they get to spend with the child. And,
Absolutely. And so I'm not sure what it's going to help.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I thought that might be your guys' answer on it, but
also on the transfer, there's still some movement. My understanding, it hasn't been completely passed yet, but it's gone through some committees and it's looked like it's going to go on the floor. Expanding the category of youth who can be transferred to the adult system is not going to be helpful either. When you look at recidivism numbers of youth who remain in the community in juvenile court systems, they're much, much lower than people who go to prisons and have prison systems and come out. A lot of them go right back in because when you're in the prison setting, you're not getting your education. It's not designed for treatment and rehabilitation. That is what you have to do in the juvenile system. We are ordered by state law and is designed that our programs have to be for treatment and rehabilitation. And any child that's in any type of juvenile residential facility or a lockdown facility or a detention facility, we have to give them schooling. You don't have to do that in the prison. And so what you're doing is you're locking up more young people in a prison setting. You're not requiring them to go to school. You're not requiring them to learn a trade. You're not requiring them to do anything that's towards treatment rehabilitation. And then you're letting them out when their sentence is finished and expecting them to be better people.
Right.
When we haven't given them any tools to be better people.
Right.
And their brains are still developing.
Absolutely.
They haven't gone through the whole process of brain development, and you're not supporting that either.
Yeah, I mean, I just think about like my son, and he was acting out, when he was in kindergarten. let's be real, he still acts out. But it was like he had already had all the punitive stuff, but the thing that turned him around was a sticker chart, right? And in some ways, I feel like that kind of might never change. There's this belief that he could do better, and therefore he did better, and he enjoyed the reward of the sticker.
Yes.
Piece of paper with some adhesive on it, but I think about that a lot with like what you guys are talking about.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
It's simple science. We know it's true. It's about brain development. It's about positive reinforcement as their brains are developing.
Yeah.
That makes them become better people.
Yeah.
Versus negativity, versus locking them up in cages and expecting them to learn from that experience.
Yeah.
That increases trauma. That increases brain development that's not healthy, and it increases the chances of them staying in the system for the rest of their life.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So one recent study that y'all have probably seen showed that Nashville's MSA had added about 98 people a day over the course of 2022, and we were at about 86 a day last year, which was 2023. So thinking about the impact, in the real estate world that we kind of live in, these in the economic development world, those are exciting statistics, right? We're a growing boom city, but what does that look like with sort of the juvenile court system? And what differences do you see between maybe kind of the population that's been here, the youth population, versus a lot of this sort of new Nashvillians who may be entering your system and in your world? Like what do you make of that, and what do you see?
Yeah, well, like Judge said, the numbers have really supported that juvenile crime is going down as our population is increasing. Our school system has 86,000 plus kids in our school system. And when we look at our daily population and just look back at an annual population going in and out of our detention center, we're usually talking between 1,500 and 2,000 kids. I mean, you're talking a drop in the bucket compared to the number of kids that are in our city. And it really, when you put it from that perspective, it makes it a really manageable issue. If our city puts the resources, efforts, and attention really into the kids that need it the most. And that's what we're trying to do down at Juvenile Court.
Well, along those lines, how's Mayor O'Connell doing?
I mean, he's been there, he hit 100 days a couple months ago. Mm-hmm. We were in his first capital improvement budget. So he was fully supportive of the Nashville Youth Campus for Empowerment when he was on council, and he's continued that support. But Mayor O'Connell has always been involved in youth justice issues. When he was on the council, when I was in Mayor Berry's office, he participated in the Youth Violence Summit, which Judge Calloway was one of the co-chairs, along with criminal court clerk Howard Gentry. And at then, council member O'Connell attended every meeting that we had for the summit, and he would show up in some of the subcommittee meetings when we were just planning different things or trying to really figure out what are some of the actions that we need to take out after this summit. He's been involved with the My Brother's Keeper work, the work that he's done, that he did in his district at Napier Elementary School and in that community around youth justice is just amazing. And he's really trying to take that model and expand it to other communities. His new director of children and youth, Dr. Watisha Lawless Moore, is actually the former principal at Napier Elementary. And she moved to Chattanooga as the assistant superintendent, but she's coming back to Nashville in the mayor's office to really work on youth issues. And so he's done a really good job so far of paying attention to young people and the issues surrounding young people. Even with the recent announcement on transit, even thinking about how it affects different communities. Young people have been involved in the conversation and have been involved in advising the way that they put that plan together. And so
you cannot say that he doesn't show up. I don't know if he sleeps, but he shows up.
That's one of his superpowers, and I tell him all the time, he shows up everywhere.
Yeah.
I'll say there's absolutely no doubt that we're ready for Freddie. I love that little slogan. But even now, we've had an opportunity to
that was a jazz album, title. So
Ready for Freddie.
Yeah.
Love it. We'll put that on the list. But he's been down to our pretrial housing facility this year already on February 19th when the youth. It was on President's Day when there was no school and youth were out. We had a fantastic program called Beat of Life that came to our pretrial housing facility, and Jelly Roll came with the Beat of Life, and
good thing Freddie had been showing up before that.
I know, right?
And not just for the star power.
Yeah, he definitely had been around before then, but he came down and greeted the youth and greeted Jelly Roll, and he really has been very supportive of both Lonnell and I, both all the issues and programs that we run. I remember when Bishop Marcus Campbell was alive and ran the gang program, Gentlemen and Not Gangsters program that we partnered with as part of our court. At the time, Councilman Freddie O'Connell. I always remember calling him Freddie so much. Mayor O'Connell would come to every single graduation. There was not a graduation that he missed. Yep. And I'd be like, because, I go to them just to give him the little graduation speak. I'm like, oh, he's here again.
Right.
He's
right. Don't you ever get tired? Right. You're making us look bad. Right. Well, if you guys could wave a magic wand and there was something that you could get from the city and something you could get from the state that's desperately needed. I know that, getting this facility is obviously a huge win. So not to stomp on that, but if you get something else, what would it be?
For me, it would be more after school programs, more community centers, more opportunities for all youth to have something positive to be a part of. Particularly, when high schools get out at 2, middle schools get out at 4, but, until 8, 9 o'clock. Mm-hmm. If there was good, positive programs in every single neighborhood that had something to offer every child, not just sports, because I would be the one that couldn't do the sports. Right. But, if there was a center that had, Lonnell and them playing sports and me over there, singing and being on the stage and, someone else drawing and doing, creative arts and visual arts, but a center that can take care of all the needs of all of our children. Yeah. I think that would make a difference. And then to keep, using that brush that I could change things. A lot of our youth commit crimes out of survival.
Absolutely.
And they're trying to survive. They're trying to, I remember a case so distinctly that it broke my heart where a child was arrested for breaking into someone's house because he broke into the neighbor's house to plug up their heater. Because their house was cold and his mom was working 2 jobs and not home, and him and his little brother were cold and he needed heat. Yeah. And, I'm like, why do we have a community where first and foremost that there's a child that has to be in a house that's cold. Right. And then has to be arrested for an offense to stay warm. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, with a broad stroke, if we can have housing that people can afford not only to live in, but to afford the basic necessities while they're in that home. So not only can they afford to stay in that home, but they can heat their home. They can provide food in their home. They can provide lights in their home. All of those things that, for me growing up, it was just something that happened. Mm-hmm. If everybody else had that same opportunity.
I would absolutely do things that I would not otherwise do if I didn't have food.
The only thing I would add to that is a consistent mechanism for our community to have accountability around youth issues. Mm-hmm. Judge mentioned the Parks Department, community centers, after-school programs, different resources for kids. But we all tend to work in our silos at times, and there's no consistent communication. We talk about this all the time, even within government. Judge has constant communication with Dr. Battle, Chief Drake, but their departments and their agencies that they work with aren't constantly communicating, and we need that constant communication education. We need to be sharing data on some of these kids and families to make sure that we're not duplicating services or no one's falling through the gaps. And if we had that support from, it's not just a government thing. It needs to be both community and government working collaboratively in partnership. But if we had some type of vehicle that was sustainable beyond administrations, then I think our community will be in a much better place.
It also seems like there could be like a cost savings to offset the cost of implementation because you're not doing duplicative work and you're not having to, pick up the phone and try to figure out what's going on over here. If you just, I'm surprised that doesn't exist, and I bet a bunch of people will be surprised.
This past mayoral election cycle, there was what they call it, the Collaborative for Children and Youth. So there were several nonprofits that got together and said, we're going to try to stand something up that's going to stand the test of time for young people and building better infrastructure and support for young people. So I hope that it really gets off the ground, and I hope that it does last and it's sustainable.
And I'll say, as Lonnell talks about that, there's over the years have been efforts to do that.
There have.
A lot of the problem is if it starts in the mayor's office, as soon as that mayor leaves,
right.
It goes to a different mayor, and it's a different plan, and it's a different group, it's a different set of people.
Yes.
And, Lonnell and I both have sat on at least 3 different child and youth mayor plans.
It's almost like
That's one perk of having some mayoral stability.
Yes.
We need somebody that's going to be there.
Yes.
Or even if you had like a
standalone
commission or something
Yes.
that where you guys could appoint, or to where it's not dependent on that change in control.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think that's what that collaborative is trying to do.
Yes.
And it's more agency based. And so regardless of who leaves,
Right.
these agencies are still here. These agencies are still doing the work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. In a 2023 article in the Tennessee Lookout, it was noted that in 2022, there were 13,700 juvenile arrests, which was down 53% from the 28,915 in 2013. So that's a 10-year time horizon there. Additionally, juveniles represented 8% of the arrests for serious offenses such as murder, rape, or aggravated assault, which was down 11%. And you all touched on this a little bit earlier, but in the last decade, is this data representative of what you're seeing, here in Nashville? And what can you tell us about, how should our listeners think about the recidivism rates?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
So those are definitely the numbers that we're seeing. The numbers of juvenile arrests and juvenile crime are definitely decreasing. I think there's a belief that there's a lot of juvenile crime because there's a lot of sensationalism when a crime happens. And so when a child is arrested for shooting or killing someone, it becomes a huge story that lasts for several months until there's another one, 3-4 months later. Whereas with adult crime, it's something that happens every day, and we don't do that much publicity about it. I absolutely, I'm heartbroken when anybody is murdered or any child is involved in a serious crime, and would love that number to be 0. And we've got some work to get to there. But it's really, like Lonnell said, if we have now the ability to put more effort and resources into that 8% of the serious crimes that are happening for juveniles, into their families, into that part of the cases and those children that we're working with. And we're seeing that, and we're able to do that more. One of the things that we worked on back in 2016, Lonnell and I in the group with the Youth Violence Summit, we talked about some of the pillars of things that we needed to do. And there were 6 pillars that we outlined of things that the government, the communities, agencies, and everyday neighbors could do in order to combat some of the youth crime. But one of the big things that we talked about were the diversion, and how do we divert more youth out of the system? Because at that time, before then, the years before that, we were arresting kids like crazy. I remember we had a case in court one day where there literally was a petition against some children on a food fight in school. And I was like, where did we get to where we're literally charging youth for food fights at school?
Yeah.
I mean, not to say that I gotten in much trouble at school, but I would have been in trouble a lot
Yeah.
if those things happen. And, and so we had to step back as a community, as, law enforcement, as courts, as schools, and say, some of these things we're arresting and citing and prosecuting for are literally youth behavior.
Right.
And they will grow out of that. They'll get in trouble. They might have to, clean up the cafeteria for 2 weeks, and then they're not going to do a food fight anymore. But
you don't need me imposing that.
You don't need that. You don't need that coming from the judge. That comes from, the school, from your peers. And so that's what we decided to do, more of the diversions. And that is showing that literally the recidivism rates of the youth that are going through diversions, they don't come back to the system. Mm-hmm. And so they're not getting penalized. They're not getting punitive sentences. They're getting an opportunity to grow and to learn that sometimes childish behavior doesn't need to happen in certain places. And so that's what we're doing. That's what we're focusing on.
Yeah. Do you find that the more serious offenses, that the recidivism rate is differs? What does that look like? Because I think that's one thing a lot of people do think a lot about is, if you have a 15-year-old that kills someone, what does that look like versus maybe more kind of minor?
Well, it's probably
offenses?
already there, right? Because they've already...
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Most of the youth that have committed serious crimes, such as murders and some of the serious aggravated robberies where someone is hurt, usually those cases are sent to the adult system. I think last year we probably transferred about 12. We average about 12 a year of youth that get transferred to the adult system. And it's hard to tell their recidivism rates because most of them are still in a incarcerated state. Mm-hmm. Those are the ones that literally break my heart.
Right.
And
do you have discretion with that?
I do have discretion. And so currently I have discretion. We'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks with the legislature. But currently, if there is a request to send a child to the adult system, I have to find 3 different things. Number one is that there's probable cause that they committed that offense, and that's the lowest standard of proof. It's probable cause. They probably did it. It probably happened. Number 2, I have to find that they're not committable to a mental health institution. And then the third thing that I have to decide now, which is the thing that the state legislature is attempting to do away with. But the third thing that I have to find is that it's in the community's best interest that child be transferred to the adult system. And under that prong, there are about 7 different things that I have to look at.
Okay.
One is that they are amenable to treatment. We have to look at their record. We have to look and see if they have had treatment efforts before and how they did with treatment before. We have to look at whether it was a crime against a person or against a property, and if they were the aggressor in the crime. We have to look and see whether it was a gang offense. We have to look and see if there are treatment options in the juvenile system that are available for them. And then finally, we have the opportunity to look and see if they have adverse childhood experiences or trauma and how that relates to the crime that they did. And so if it's a weighing test and if, those things weigh against transferring the child to the adult system, then we don't. Then I don't. I choose not to. There have been some very serious charges of people that did not get transferred to the adult system, based on what I found in those things. And I will be happy to say there's I know of at least 2 or 3 youth that did not get transferred who went on later to go to college and are doing well in our community.
I mean, that's like 100% the goal, right? I mean,
absolutely.
And it is sad that there are victims before, but if we just transfer these people, the likelihood that they're back out doing the same thing at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a much smaller number than I would have expected.
Me too.
12.
Yes.
That's actually very interesting.
Yes.
So, gun question. In light of Covenant, which I can see could have even made it harder for you guys to sort of believe in the child and fight the good fight, so to speak. But in light of the Covenant shooting in 2023, many in the General Assembly are saying, no, it's it's the person, it's not the gun, and they use it as a justification to not consider an overall ban of any type of gun or accessory, including like assault rifles like the AR-15 or the AK-47, just for a few. But I mean, what are your thoughts on any of that as it relates to the juvenile system?
On gun control?
I mean, just on gun control. Also, I'd be interested in seeing like your mental health. It's sort of like, the argument is always like, is it the mental health or is it the access or is it both? And I mean,
it's the classic, chicken and egg. Is it the gun or the owner of the gun?
So I'll start and you could jump in, Judge. In all my work with young people, I was devastated when a young person told me it was easier for them to get a gun than to buy a pack of cigarettes in Nashville. That statement broke my heart, but we dove into the conversation. They actually walked me through like how accessible guns and weapons are to them. You couple that with, and we've talked about brain science a lot during the interview, you couple that with the fact that their brains aren't fully developed, their decision making isn't going to be like an adult's.
Right.
And having that type of access, it's just a recipe for disaster. And when the state or when any decision makers, policy makers aren't willing to really take a serious look at gun control, then they're allowing the access to always be there for young people. Policymakers can't do anything about the brain development. Like, we all had to go through that. I'm still going through it in some cases. Judge will tell you, men's brains develop slower than women's.
Absolutely.
I'm still going through it.
But when it comes to access, we absolutely can do something about it as a community. We absolutely should. And I hope that one day that our state and our policymakers will be willing and have the courage to do that.
Have you guys been able to speak to, lawmakers? Have you been asked to sit down to give kind of your juvenile, side of things?
I have not been asked to speak to lawmakers about that.
Wow.
I have not either, but I'm willing to come right now.
Well, I mean,
I know Chief Drake has expressed his concern over common sense gun safety laws. And,
right.
and our police department, they give out gun locks. They talk about, lock your vehicles if you're going to have your weapon. I mean, they make so much effort to do what they can from a local perspective, but they would like to see safety and gun laws and gun safety being addressed at the state level.
Have they been approached to?
I absolutely know that Chief Drake has
spoken about it.
Yes.
Okay, that's good.
And I will definitely add on to what Lonnell has said. It is super easy for a youth to get a gun. And when they don't have the brain development, they don't have the thought process. The last part of the brain that develops is our frontal cortex, which is our decision-making part of the brain. And so when you look at your child and you say, why did you do that? And they give you that look like, it's literally because that impulse part control. Of it has not control. Developed.
Yeah.
And so, you have we have a country that's obsessed with guns and fights and, video games and YouTube videos and movies. The ones that sell the most money are the ones that show all of this violence and damage and stuff. Yeah. But these people get up and they go back, to do the next one. And some of our youth aren't getting that. That this is a finality. That when you pull that trigger, no telling who could be killed and what could happen.
Right.
They don't get it. They don't understand that consequences. And so for me, it's so much easier for the grown-ups to understand the consequences.
Right.
And so if grown-ups could just say, we understand that when we allow open access, if you allow guns to go anywhere, in cars, in parks, in bars, and wherever it is that you think,
Schools.
except for in
Schools,
schools, except for the legislature.
Yeah.
Anywhere else,
Right.
there's going to be access to youth. As we look at all of our data and look at how much youth crime has gone down, the two charges that have not gone down over the years are car thefts and guns.
Wow.
And it's so easy for us as adults to combat that. We leave our cars open. We don't lock our cars. We just run in real quick. It's cold. I don't want to get cold.
Right.
I'm gonna let my car run while I run into the store. I'm just gonna be in there 5 minutes. And I've got my car running. I got my keys in there, and I got my gun. And a kid that's just bored, it doesn't have a productive thing to do, and they're walking down the street and they see a car running, keys open. What are you gonna do? It's an open invitation.
Right.
And so we need to quit inviting our youth to the tables where we keep our guns, and we need to lock our guns.
Well, and this isn't even, mental illness because it's like a child.
It's a
Does
child.
it? I mean, they don't even have the mental capacity
Yes.
to begin with to even start.
Correct.
I mean, some of them may also have mental illness, but
Absolutely.
but in a way, they all kind of,
Yep.
have lack of mental competency.
And I think for me, our legislature are kind of being disingenuous on, it seems as if they're blaming the youth for these crimes that are occurring, the the Covenant shooting, the 2 cases that happened out of Memphis. In all of those cases, the perpetrators were adults.
Right.
They weren't youth. They were adults.
Yeah.
And, it's amazing to me that if we would just make a few changes to the law, if I hold an adult accountable for not locking their gun in their car, maybe I will keep locking. I have the brain development that says, oh, if I don't lock this gun up, then I could face some consequences. Then I'm going to lock my car door. Or I'm going to keep my gun with me. I'm going to keep it safe. And so we could do a lot of amazing things if we make adults make good decisions and continue to work with our youth as they continue to develop their brains.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a big question. So we talked about the falling very positive data about violent crime, just overall crime, youth crime, really has come down a lot over the last 10 years. What would you consider one of the biggest positive things that's happened in this space that accounts for that, and what would you say is one of the worst? And it can be policy, law, funding. What does that look like in your world? What moved the needle? And Angie and I have done some research about some of the things that Governor Haslam had done at the state level with people not being in isolated confinement and detention, things like that. But it's just think what is it that to you really moves the needle on these issues, or has?
You can start.
Okay. Under Governor Haslam, there was a commission that looked at juvenile court reform. And in 2017 or 2018, there was a bill that was passed that looked at the way that we were doing juvenile courts and juvenile sentencing, and made a huge change to do more things that were evidence-based and that were proven to help decrease the number of youth that were committing crimes. And it was working. It is working. I mean, it's still working. We see some much improvement in the systems. And so I definitely think that was a big game changer. When Governor Haslam also decided to take on adverse childhood experiences as one of his platforms, and to make sure that there was an adverse childhood experience network across the state, so that we could understand that kids just don't wake up one day and say, "Ooh, I'm going to murder someone." Yeah. That there are a lot of things that happen, a lot of trauma that happens, and that we as systems, as community, have to work on that trauma piece in order to make a difference. I think that has changed the needle as well. I think there's a lot of studies, not just in Tennessee, but across the country, that are showing that diversions and positive probation reform are making a difference on our youth and the youth numbers. So, literally countrywide, we see numbers of youth recidivism rates and youth being arrested are going down across the country. And you have agencies like the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, the National Council of Juvenile Court Judges, the National County Court of State Courts. All of them are doing, I can't leave out the Casey Foundation, all of them are doing a lot of good work on providing support and resources to juvenile courts across the country on what works and what doesn't. And what we are finding is that the punitive nature of the things that we used to do doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go ahead. Just to add to that, I do believe the Juvenile Justice Reform Act played a big part. Before that, in Davidson County, we addressed the school to prison pipeline. And so Judge Calloway also led an effort called Passage, Positive and Safe Schools.
Advancing Greater Equity.
There you go.
These guys are a team.
Where a lot of acronyms.
where we really addressed some of the school discipline reforms. We looked at suspensions and expulsions. And being able to really try to do some things to cut off that school to prison pipeline, and couple that with the Juvenile Justice Reform Act, I think it really set Davidson County up to be able to see youth crime go down drastically.
I'll give a shout out to Senator Hale, who is very, very deeply invested in Safe Babies Court, and has made sure that there's funding for Safe Babies Court ever since it started, I think, back in 2017. And Safe Babies Court is one of those courts that absolutely looks at adverse child experiences, trauma for babies 0 to 3, and making sure it's a preventive action, and that we're preventing kids, intervening early in their lives, 0 to 3, and that's one of the state legislatures, I will say, kind of gets it, that if we don't do enough on prevention, that we end up losing kids on the back end, and he's willing to put money into that type of program.
We're excited about the new Nashville Youth Campus for Empowerment. I believe the current facility was built 20 years ago for a much smaller, much different Nashville. Lonnell, I know you've been working, you've been making this pitch for how many years now? I'm not sure. Wow.
We've been working since 2017, really trying to push it. That's when we did master planning, and people started listening to us after we made so much noise.
Man, the wheels turn slow, but they do turn.
They did.
And so tell us a little bit about, for the listeners who haven't heard, just the statistics that I've read, hope to be completed in 2026, will span 14 acres and cost about $260 million. Yes. But I know there's a lot of integration and a lot of things that we're really excited that are going to be there.
Yeah. So let me start. This is a vision of Judge Calloway's. This is something that really came from years of serving as a public defender in the juvenile justice system, as a magistrate, and now as elected judge. She has seen a lot. She's been able to travel the country as our juvenile court judge and see what works in other places, what doesn't work in other places, and bring those best practices back to Nashville. But we are building the Nashville Youth Campus for Empowerment. We are going from currently 2 facilities that total 96,000 square feet to 3 facilities on the campus that will total 279,000 square feet. We're going to bring our Metro Student Attendance Center and our Juvenile Justice Center under one roof on the new campus. We'll have our pretrial housing facility that will not be institutionalized. It'll be a more trauma-informed campus. The pretrial housing actually is going to mirror what you might see on a campground or college dormitory. But the new facilities that we're going to add to the campus and functionality that we don't currently have in Nashville, we're going to have a 24-hour assessment center for youth in crisis. So Judge talked about those status offenders. When they're arrested, they actually shouldn't be taken to our detention center. But right now, the police department has nowhere else to take them. They'll be able to take them to this 24-hour assessment center. We'll be able to assess their needs. We'll have a 12-bed respite center inside that center. So if they can't go back or don't need to go back home immediately, they'll be able to stay in the respite center. And we will connect them with the programs and services in the community that they truly need, going back to that diversionary model. We'll also have a family services center that will allow us to do safe exchanges for parents that have had past domestic disputes.
Instead of like exchanging at a police department or something like that, which automatically
could be traumatic for the child
right.
to say, I'm going to see my other parent, you got to go to the police station.
Right.
They'll be able to do that in a home-like environment, which we'll also be able to use for therapeutic visitation. So instead of doing therapeutic or supervised visitation at a DCS office, they'll be able to do it in a place that will have a kitchen, it'll have a living room, and parents could actually learn parenting skills the right way under supervision.
It's amazing, because so much of what you do is educating the parents and bringing them up to where they need to be, because who knows what their trauma is.
Yes.
Too.
Yes. So we're super excited about it. We are in the architect design phase now. The project is slated to go under construction sometime this summer, and we're slated to move in 2027. So we're super excited about it. We can't wait for the community to see what we're going to bring to Nashville.
So tell everybody where it is.
It is located at 1354 Brick Church Pike. It's the site of the old Almena Shrine Temple. Right off of Interstate 65, right outside the downtown loop. So it's close enough to the center of the city that it's accessible to everyone, but it's far enough outside of downtown that we don't have to deal with some of the barriers and challenges of what goes on downtown, parking.
I was going to say, you might not have to have paid parking, which is, I mean, that's kind of a big deal, right?
For our families, it's a huge deal.
I mean,
it's a huge deal.
So, yeah. Okay. So maybe, Lonnell, we'll get Julieanna. Do you want to come over? Maybe you guys switch out for just a second. Okay. So we have just brought in Julieanna to tell us a little bit about CASA and CASA's mission and how it works as one of these organizations to also help the juvenile court system. So tell us about it, Julieanna.
Yeah, so CASA stands for Court-Appointed Special Advocates, and we recruit and train everyday community volunteers that go through an extensive training on the front end and then is sworn in by our juvenile court judge. And at that point, they're appointed to a case. It could be one child, it could be a sibling group, but basically they're charged with helping painting the picture for the judge or the magistrate on what's happening in that child's life. So we don't investigate the allegations of abuse. We simply investigate and look at what's happening in that child's life now and advocate for the best interest. So we're hoping to switch that family or that child out of survival and into thriving with our advocacy.
And how is that different from like a guardian ad litem or something like that?
Yeah, so in the state of Tennessee, a guardian ad litem has to be a court-appointed special attorney, and so they're there to represent the child's best interests legally. DCS has an attorney that's there to represent the state's best interest. We're there solely for the best interest of the child. So oftentimes our CASA volunteers, they have that one case, whereas guardian ad litems or caseworkers have a caseload. Mm-hmm. So they're able to go out and talk to the teachers, the parents, the neighbors, anyone and everyone that's involved in that child's life to help gather information to figure out what's in the best interest.
Which the court system would never have enough time to hear all those people, let alone get them, whatever you have, subpoena them, get them there and all that. So you can sort of short circuit and get a more full picture.
Mm-hmm.
What does the time span typically look like as far as if you're a CASA volunteer? Is that like a 6-month, engagement, or is that like a 5-year or a 10-year? Kind of what does that look like?
So it runs the gamut. We ask for at least a 2-year commitment from our CASA volunteers, just because a case can last that long. We've had cases that have gone much shorter. We've had cases that go much longer. I will say that the majority of our volunteers work full-time and also are CASA volunteers. And oftentimes when our CASA volunteers get involved, they hang in there with that child until they find permanency. So whether that's going back with the parents, being placed with a relative, or sometimes when they're going the adoption route, they hang in there every step of the way.
Yeah. We have a very low, I don't know what you call it, but dropout rate for CASA volunteers with the families, right?
Yes, oftentimes like I said, when the CASAs get involved and they see the kids and they get involved with the families, they're invested at that point.
Yeah.
We had one CASA volunteer most recently. She was appointed to a young lady at 8 years old, and she hung there with her till she aged out at 18.
Oh, wow.
So she has had one case, and it lasted for 10 years.
Wow.
But she hung in there every step of the way and has maintained contact with that young lady and remains a support for her as a young person, a young adult.
That's amazing. And so, Judge, from your perspective, when you hear, I don't know, does the CASA volunteer get up on the stand and testify, or are they just providing information, and how much weight, or how are you kind of looking at that?
Yeah, I will say first, before I answer that question, I have been a supporter for CASA for many, many years. I once was on the board of CASA prior to me becoming one of the magistrates. I had to resign from being the board because that would be a conflict. But so I was on the board.
Seems like a good trade-off.
Yeah, it was pretty good. I took it. Yeah. I will say it's a family thing. It's a family affair. My mother was a CASA volunteer in Louisville, Kentucky.
Nice.
And she actually one year won CASA Advocate of the Year. And so CASA has been in my soul and in my heart for many years. We get reports from CASA. So every time there's a court hearing, they've updated their report on what they've done and what's happened to the child since the last court hearing. And so we use those court reports to make sure that we know and are caught up. And usually we get those reports before the court hearing, so we have an opportunity to review them. There are occasions where a CASA volunteer will testify in court. I can't say that we give them more weight, but I can say that the youth who have CASAs, they tend to find permanency quicker. They tend to have a more robust plan of what permanency looks like and how many people are going to be in their support system. Those youth who have CASAs tend not to come back into the system. So what that means is, for the ones that don't have CASA advocates and we are just relying on a caseworker to determine what's in the best interest, we may do a placement and things fall apart.
Right.
6 months later or a year later, and that child comes back into the custody. It doesn't happen with the CASA kids.
Wow. That's amazing.
So we definitely support CASA. I have stories when I did not agree with a CASA volunteer and then did my own thing. And then later on, the CASA volunteer comes back and says, I told you so. That has happened. She didn't say it in those words, but she was like,
She's like, Judge, with all due respect, I told you so. Well, I know, CASA's got a mission to have, sort of a one-to-one for every child in the system. We want to be able to provide an advocate. And Julieanna, Judge, how can, it's not just about, of course, people can volunteer to be an advocate, but what are other ways that the community can help CASA meet that goal? Because if what Judge says is correct, then we absolutely need to be putting funding toward that, because it lowers the funds everywhere else of what we're doing, if you want to take the cynical view of it.
Absolutely. We have about 800 youth in our community who are in the Department of Children's Services custody currently. Okay. And so it would be a blessing if all 800 of those youth had a CASA volunteer.
Yeah.
And so that does take funding. That takes staff. That takes an effort to bring in volunteers. I will also say there's a high number of disproportionate minorities in the system. And so of that 800, there's more youth who are minority status. than there are in our communities
Yeah.
as a whole. And you find that at every stage of our justice systems. And so we have a lack of minority volunteers. And so I know there's been a push from CASA, which I think is great, to look at some of the fraternities and sororities in the community and encourage them to have
a great
classes
idea.
together. So you have your group of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the best sorority, having a class together. So that, they, as sisterhood, can each take a case and volunteer. And that helps to improve the number of, it's really a blessing when a kid sees someone who's in the system and they probably are in a home that doesn't look like them. It doesn't have the same cultural background as them.
Yeah.
And they don't have a caseworker that, is like them or anything. A lot of times they don't have a judge that looks like them. So everybody in the system doesn't look like them in the home they're in. But if they get a CASA worker that looks like them, feels like them, understands like them, and knows their culture,
It gives them hope in a way.
it gives them hope, and it makes a difference. And so, whatever we can do to get more volunteers.
I love that idea though, because what a resume builder too, if you're in college, and you're looking for things that you've done. It's a great resume builder for those kids, and you're also really helping out.
Yes.
Juliana, what else can people do to, obviously donate. Where do they go to
How
donate?
can they learn more about it? Where can they go?
Yeah. Well, you can go to our website. It's CASA Nashville, CASA Nashville.org. We're also on all the social media, Facebook, Instagram, and post on there regularly. But just showing up, I've worked for a multitude of nonprofits in my career, and I will say that the CASA mission is one of those that word of mouth is our biggest recruiter. When I first came to CASA 11 years ago, I did the recruitment and interview of the potential and new advocates, and it amazed me at how many people were like, yeah, my brother, sister's cousin, uncle was a volunteer, and they told me about their experience, and I just had to wait, for the right time in my life.
Yeah.
So hearing about us, sharing about us, because when we talk about our kids, and I think collectively, Judge Calloway and Lonnell, we consider them our kids. Mm-hmm. And so continuing to show up in ways, anyone who's interested in potentially fostering one day, we have a lot of volunteers that come and be CASA volunteers first, to kind of learn about the system. And boy, you learn about the system, and and it has prepared them better from the volunteer standpoint to be foster parents.
Yeah, and I think any of us are happy to talk about it at any time. But you can help in very little ways, like you said, just sharing it and sharing the mission. Okay, so let's do some quick lightning round questions for the judge.
First question: the name of a book that every person should read.
I think there's two right now, but I'll start with Miller's
Children. It can be two.
Okay. I'll start with Miller's Children. And I actually don't know, I can't remember the writer. But Miller's Children is about the youth who have, across the country, who have committed serious crimes. And a look at how they really can be rehabilitated if we give them a chance. So Miller's Children is one of my favorites.
Miller's Children, Why Giving Teenage Killers Miller's Children, Why Giving Teenage Killers a Second Chance Matters for All of Us. Looks like it's by James Garbarino.
That's it. That's exactly it. You're fast. The other one I like is The Deepest Well. The Deepest Well. It's by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, who currently is the Surgeon General for California. But it explains adverse childhood experiences and explains how it makes a difference in all of our lives and how it affects all of us. And so I think that that's a good book. And I said two, huh?
You can add a third.
Okay, the third one I would say is a book. I have yet to finish it yet, but I'm still working on it. But it's called Dying of Whiteness. Dying of Whiteness. And it's actually by a writer here in Nashville. He was a doctor who wrote the book and talks about issues such as he looks at communities in St. Louis, Missouri, about gun reform. He looks right here in Tennessee about healthcare reform. And he looks in Kansas about school reform. and compares how there are contingencies of white people who are willing to die versus open up systems for others. And it's amazing to me.
I think so much of everything just goes back to fear.
Yeah.
And knowledge is the only way to
Absolutely.
combat the fear. So I love that. It looks like this is by Jonathan Metzl.
And he's a Vanderbilt doctor who wrote this.
Good for them.
It's a lot of stats and a lot of studies in it, but it's really the message is
sounds
really
fascinating.
good. It is fascinating.
Yeah.
All right, here's an easier one. This is
Okay.
a binary.
All right, I'm ready for this
Kentucky Wildcats or Louisville Cardinals?
Oh, Louisville Cardinals. That ain't even close.
My parents both went to Kentucky, and you had the whole Patino issue.
yeah.
But I like Louisville.
Yeah.
Good
So my
place.
whole family, we're from the Lexington side, and my whole family loves the cats. But my dad got frustrated with them, so he went to the flea market somewhere and bought this like cards jacket, and he would just like wear it for Christmas and everything, just to antagonize.
Love it. Yeah, no, we bleed red. Yeah, we're all about Louisville.
She's wearing blue though. I'm just saying.
Only because nice.
Okay, well, so we've heard that you are a big game show fan. What's your favorite?
I am a big game show fan. Right now, my favorite is America Says. It comes on the Game Show Network. America Says. My second probably would be Family Feud with Steve Harvey. Steve Harvey.
There is no. I mean, that man is funny.
He is funny. He is funny.
My God.
Yeah, those are probably my first two.
Here's an easy one for you. Favorite karaoke song? And since we know from before we started taping that you are a frequent karaoke performer, where is your favorite place to perform in Nashville?
So
She's like, oh, do I have to tell that?
You don't have to answer that.
So my regular spot would be Rebar at the Dam off the Stewart's Fair Fight. I absolutely love Sid's. Oh, what is it? Sid's Piano Bar. It's called something else, but it's Sid's Piano Bar on Gallatin Road. It's a Sid Gold. Thank you.
Sid Gold.
I love. Somebody else may have gone there. I love Sid's Gold piano bar, piano karaoke. I think that's probably my favorite spot. And then, of course, my favorite song. First, I was afraid. I was petrified. Kept thinking I could never live without you by my side.
Oh, man. She's such a good singer. And I challenge you to find a judge that will answer questions like this.
I have to say this, too. I was up late last night watching for the first time the movie The Replacements. And I was going through my TV and just came upon it. And one of the players was singing I Will Survive. And it was
like,
part of the song. I was like, oh my God, I gotta watch this. And it was like a theme of their team, I Will Survive. So yeah.
All right. So last question. Who should we do this with next? Is there a Nashville leader that you think we should have on?
Yeah, I think you should have Kathy Sinback.
Oh, Kathy.
Yeah,
we used to work with Matt.
Yeah, Matt was my office mate at Bassbury and Sims. Yeah.
She's at Court
She used to be. Let us all take a pause.
Moment of silence.
Moment of silence. She used to be. She left me to be the
head of the
executive
ACLU.
director of the ACLU.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right. I knew that. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's she's fine. Well, thank you guys. I mean,
But she's an amazing soul.
all. I mean, Lonnell, thank you. Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Juliana, for being on. Thank you guys for listening to another episode of Climbing the Charts.